Gloating emoji? Because that's just powerful right there. You're right. Okay, sorry, I'm not hipping with it. This is a GIF or a GIF, however you like to pronounce it. But the idea here is before, probably every single day before you got into project week, it was you came in, you pulled a lab, you completely ignored the README, and you ran learn, right?
Yeah.
Okay, right? You just got to chase those green lights. You're looking at the test, and you want to pass the test, right? And then you would finish the lab, go to the next lab, clone it down, and of course read the README, run learn, try to pass the test, and see if you can learn something from those labs. But here in Project Week, now you are working on one single app for multiple days, and you're already starting to see how potentially complicated it could be. Some of you have probably run into an issue where it was working, you built a method, you added it, you changed one thing because you wanted to add a new feature, and then what happened to your app? Everything works perfect, right? It totally bust and broke. And so the reason I'm going to make this large leap from the Power Rangers into what is the importance of testing is that there's this idea that every single person in the Power Rangers formed together to be what? Right? You weren't watching Mighty Morphin. You were watching a different era. No, the idea is that all of them form together. They're each individual pieces, and they form together to form like what is equivalent to like what is called the Megazord, right? The Megazord. You remember that? The Megazord? And they would like get into like their robot, and then the Blue Ranger was like the foot, right? And then the Red Ranger was like the body and the head. The Yellow Ranger was like an arm. You're like whatever. And they all form together. The thing is, if something went wrong with one of them, they could not form the Megazord. And so you need to understand each individual piece. And if you know that if every single one is nice and healthy and they still can't form the Megazord, then something external is happening, right? And so just in terms of code, let's actually just kind of like take this into code, right? Let's just say I have some awesome code here. Oh man, Chet, you do me solid and like kill the lights? I'm sorry. Is this like hard to read?
Yeah.
Sorry. But let me just blow that up a little bit. Bloop, bloop. Is that okay? That's okay.
Just please don't make the color of the text different than the actual word.
There's not much I can do. That's just syntax highlighting.
No, I know, but that would drive me insane.
All right, so let's just take the fact that what if each one of these methods here was like a Power Ranger? Cool. So I have a Blue Ranger. All it does is it just returns the string blue. I have a method black. It just returns black, pink, yellow, and red. Right? So far, so good. No big deal. And the idea is that at some point, they all form this Megazord. So I need to make a method that actually combines all of them. So how would I do that? Yeah, right? I just make a method like Megazord. I don't know how to spell this, so hopefully this is correct, right? And all this method does is it combines all of them, right? So I have blue plus black plus pink plus yellow plus red. Oop, that's not right. Plus red. All right? And then how can I actually print this and like show this? What do I need to do? Right, I can print the Megazord, the Megazord method. Right? P is just short for P, for print. If you'll notice, like puts is like print to string. So it'll print this out as a string versus P, which is just going to print to the string, which is different. It's not really important. Don't worry about it. One is a string and one necessarily not a string. Cool. So what I can do is I can run Ruby, and I can run the file Power Rangers. Oh my God. Great Americans. Look at this. Blue, black, pink, yellow, and red. And so now, metaphorically speaking, if you understand it, can follow the lore of Power Rangers, at some point they introduced a new Ranger, right? This Green Ranger. Cool, right? So let's say you're working on this app and your boss comes in like, yo, check it out, brand new feature. I need you to make a new Power Ranger, and they're going to form the Megazord as well. So go ahead and do that. You're like airborne, no big deal, got you fam. How would you do that? Def, right, green, and then it just like comes in and it's like, yo, you're the Green Ranger, you're the best, no big deal. And then what do I need to do this Megazord method? Add green, right? Cool. And so if I were to go ahead and run this file, right, now I'm pushed that change to production, and I run that file, all of a sudden, bam, there's this happy trail, everything works, everything is good to go. So as you start to slowly add more functionality to your app, you want to test it. But what happens, right, let's just think through. For whatever reason, a new feature comes out, right? You watch the Power Rangers for a long time, and all of a sudden, you're like, guess what? The Green Ranger actually becomes the White Ranger. You're like, okay, no big deal. I got you, fam. So the Green Ranger becomes the White Ranger and actually takes over the Power Rangers entirely and gets rid of the Red Ranger. He actually just like completely like kicks him out. It's like weird. And so what do I do here? Like, how can I do this? If I were to get rid of the Red Ranger, right? And let's just say I didn't write any tests. And I simply said, oh my God, I have 2 people working on this feature. One person on my team gets rid of the Red Ranger. And the other person takes the Green Ranger and turns it into the White Ranger. So if I'm working on this and all I'm responsible for is making the Green Ranger white, what am I going to do to this method? Make this Green Ranger the White Ranger. So if I were to run this now, and I merged in my friend's changes who actually eliminates the Red Ranger, all of a sudden my app doesn't work. I have no idea what's wrong. It says there's like undefined local variable or method red. All of this is designed to explain to you why testing is important. And the idea is that every single person on your team is going to be working on different features. If you have all the tests built in, where it's like, hey, the Red Ranger must exist, the Green Ranger must exist, all right, the Blue Ranger must exist. And they seem trivial at the time when you're building it, but as you start to expand, if you make one change, you want to make sure the entire app doesn't break. Some of the things that you're running into now as you're just adding more and more features. And so let's actually learn and understand a little bit more about RSpec, which is a very popular testing framework in Ruby, and write some tests, and we can start to see something known as test-driven development. So first thing I want to do is I notice that inside my file, I don't have a RSpec folder and I don't have any tests. I can go my command line, and if I have the RSpec gem installed globally, I can run the RSpec command with the flag of -- init. So I'm going to initialize RSpec in my current directory. So what this will build for me is 2 things. This .rspec and this folder called spec with a file called spec helper. Let's take a look at it. This .spec does something called -- require spec helper, which is, oh, okay, that's a little weird. If I open spec and I see spec helper, and it says this file was generated by RSpec init. Nice. It does something with the load path, okay. So this file will always be loaded without the need to explicitly require it any files. So the combination between this RSpec helper and this -- require RSpec literally means that I don't have to require RSpec every single time. This will auto require it all for me. So when I run my tests, they'll all be here and be available for me. Any questions? How are we feeling about like just initializing RSpec and putting RSpec and being able to at least start to write tests inside our projects? Yeah.
What if you have like kind of main code that doesn't have a method or a class? Then when RSpec requires everything, won't it run that code?
Say again?
So let's say you have code that doesn't live in a class or a method.
Okay.
Right? It just lives there in the file. Then when RSpec requires all the files, won't that code run?
It will require them, but it won't necessarily execute them.
Huh. What's the difference
Between
requiring and executing?
requiring is just the equivalent of like copying and pasting the code into another file, so that you can separate all your files, and so you can organize your code. So for example, right, I have Power Rangers, right? In theory, I would have like a class blue, class black, class pink, class yellow, and I'd have 4 different files for it. If I just simply require relative blue, black, pink, and yellow, that winds up being 4 lines on this file, and I can start interacting with each of the Power Rangers in this file. It just require relative, just copying and pasting it in. It's not running it necessarily.
If there's code outside the class, it will run, right?
Well, not unless it's called.
if that file is never called or invoked, that method, that code is not read. For example, what you're saying is if I just have willy-nilly 4 times do just sitting on like the global, this will run when this file is read.
And when it's required, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Required basically says that when you're having, because again, when you're working with multiple people, each person might be working on a different file, and you're required to say, hey, your class, your object is on like a totally different .rb. So you're requiring that RB to be pulled in, so when you're in the RB that you're on, it's going, oh, I know where this is. It's in this.
It'll run the code. The thing is, you shouldn't have active methods sitting on the global. You should wrap everything in its method and then invoke it when you want to invoke it.
Like from a rate, probably?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes?
Oh, sorry, I didn't know if you were there.
Sounds
What's the
good.
difference between required and required relative?
Require will pull in like a gem.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and then require relative is like you're pulling in a file relative to that file.
Gotcha.
Well, is there like in Python, there's like if name equals main, see if like if you're running the file itself, is there like an equivalent in Ruby?
There is.
Okay.
Yeah, there is.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, great. So, cool. So getting back to the spec helper, there's a lot of like, don't be afraid of source code because there's a lot of really good information in here. So like sometimes there'll be like 30 tests and you're like, oh my God, they take forever. There are certain things that you could do, right? Like if you were to read through some of this code, I think one of them is like if you want to print the 10 slowest examples for your code, you can just uncomment this and then you can run it, right? And so a lot of this is really good documentation on how to actually configure your RSpec if there are certain things that you want to write. Like if you only want to run all the failures, right? How do you do that? There's a flag for that. Cool, that's what fast fail does. And so you'll be able to see all the different configurations for your RSpec. So let's actually get into writing tests. The idea here is because of the way that it's pulling in, I'm going to write the spec. My file is called program. So this is what we're going to do today. We're going to write and build out this method called is this a palindrome. So in my spec file, I'm going to make a new file called program underscore spec. It needs this underscore spec because that's what RSpec is looking for as a file naming convention so that it recognizes it. Cool?
Yep.
Any questions on this like underscore spec? Good? Are you good? Yeah.
Oh, no, yeah. So, yeah, so it's like the word that you spelled for is spelled backwards the same way, right?
Like race car?
Yeah.
Very good.
Plan.
So-
Pan.
As we're writing these like spec files, the first thing I need is I actually need the file that I'm going to be looking at. So if I need this program file, how would I pull it in here?
Require relative.
Okay, and what is the relative path?
Slash. Raw.
I'm looking for program. Yeah, because remember, I'm in the spec folder. I need to go up to the intro to TDD folder, and then inside there's this program file. Okay, so you've been through, I don't need this anymore, and I definitely don't need this anymore. Oop. Okay, great. And so you've been through a lot of your like RSpec code. What does it look like? How would I write it?
Spec.
What is like the syntax for this? That's okay if you don't know, because we're just gonna look it up together if you don't know.
Like it's do def method, just
Mm.
describe it does.
Okay, there's something like describe,
Yeah.
describe. Describe what?
I thought it was DSC.
DSC?
Yeah. DESC.
It's okay. So if you don't know, right, you simply put RSpec, right, tests, examples, bam. Definitive RSpec tutorial. Wow, so good, so powerful. Describe, great. Okay, and then describe do it. Let's just rip this like a G. So this is what it looks like. Describe something. So what we're gonna describe is what? Right, is palindrome. because that's the name of our method here. We can name this anything we want, but the idea here is that we just want it to be similar. And so we're going to describe is palindrome, and what does it do? What should it do? And so here's like general rule of thumb. So the first thing is you want to make sure it works. Right? So how do we describe it? So it should return true if the word is a palindrome. Is anyone like confused with what this palindrome is? Who know? Raise your hand if you know what a palindrome is. Palindrome? Good?
No, I don't know.
Okay, it's just a word spelled forward and backwards is exactly the same. Right? So a very common one would be what? Very good. So the first thing is you want to tell it, I'm going to expect something. Let's see if the rest of the syntax is here. There it is. Bloop, bloop. So it looks like this. You're going to expect, and expect takes an argument. And expects is palindrome. Remember, we are now trying to invoke this method. Is palindrome. And so we can put in anything we want in here. Right? Like what? This is one that I like, right? This is definitely a palindrome.
Nice.
And that should equal true. Everyone says race car, but poop is definitely a palindrome. It's very easy to see. Unagi, right? So the first thing is that we want to make sure it works, right? So how do I actually run these tests? I can simply run rspec, and I can specify the file name in here if I wanted to. Given that we only have one file, if I just run rspec, which is what learn does, like in the background, it'll tell me. Oh no. What is this here? Is palindrome should return true if the word is in fact a palindrome. However, I expect true, which makes sense because I'm saying it should equal true, but I got nil. Why did I get nil? That's because this thing doesn't do anything, right? So how can I make this work? And you're probably thinking like, how do we take this one method, which we all know how to write, and Evans is going to stretch this into an hour? What an idiot. How do I do this?
You can use the dot reverse method.
Sure, you can use the dot reverse method. How would I do that?
If word equals word dot reverse.
If word,
Equals
right? Word dot reverse. What do I want to do? I want to return true.
Or we could just do word equals word dot reverse.
Yeah. Oops, bloop. Embarrassing. Bloop, bloop, bloop. Right? Because remember the implicit returns, right? So this should return a Boolean, and so this should return true. So let's actually test to see if this works. Powerful. So good. That's it, guys. That's all I got for you. Right. No, I'm just kidding. So, you really thought that was it? So the idea here is like, first this is red, right? And then it's green, and then I look at my code to see, hey, is this the cleanest and is it the best it could possibly be? So the idea here that I want to add to this README is, whoops, I'm just going to add it here. Sure, you want to make sure it works. And the way the testing life cycle goes is it goes in this red, green, refactor sort of life cycle. First you write a test because you want to make sure that something works. Then you actually write the method. You make sure the test passes and it's green. And then you look at it and you're like, can I refactor this? Which we already kind of did, because the first thing we did was we did that whole if word equals word dot reverse, return true, end. That would have passed the test. Then we look back at our method and you're like, can I refactor this? And then we did, and we made it just this one-liner. So all your tests are always going to be in this red-green refactor state. Cool? So the second rule, typically, besides make sure it works, is you want to make sure it what? If this returns true for everything, is your method any good? So how would you describe that? Make sure it works, right? Right, make sure it doesn't work when it doesn't work, right? So this English is not very good, but the idea here is it falls under the umbrella of making sure it works, right? So here I can just simply do this, and it should return false if the word is not a palindrome. So what is not a palindrome? Plant.
I
Oh.
was gonna say crack.
Or crack. Wow. Like,
No, crack.
wow, I'm just a terrible human being. Great. So let's do this. Actually, this should be false, right? Smart. Great. Boom. Let's run RSpec, and we see that these in fact pass too. So I'm hit the green, and let's take a look at that refactor. Do I need to refactor this? Nah, dog. We good. We in there. So now the idea here is it works when it should, right? And it doesn't necessarily work when it shouldn't work. And so the next thing is you want to start considering what are known as edge cases, right? So the first rule of thumb is it should work when it should work, right? To include not working when it doesn't need to work, for lack of better English. But you know what I'm saying, right?
Negative testing.
Right? So the number two you can think of is edge cases. And what are edge cases?
Cases that can break the software or the application, but are really not that common that you think of. They're like really questionable as whether a person can do them or not.
Yeah. So edge cases, right, to frame it, is basically here is a weird scenario that could possibly happen, but very likely won't, but is in fact possible. That could potentially break your code. Because all cases you would imagine, like, oh my God, any string I put in here would work. However, let's do this. Boop, boop, boop. What if, right, it should return, and let's leave this blank for now, if the word is not a string. So what if I put in something like 111? What would happen?
You should throw an error.
What should happen? What will happen here? So this is the edge case, right? You're like, hey, I could put any word, and it'll just basically reverse that, Bad Johnson. And if it works, it works. But what if somebody put a number in? It's like, oh, is this a palindrome? Is 111 a palindrome? What will happen in the code, first of all?
It'll say no method error.
Let's find out. Oh man, that doesn't look good. Oh right, of course it's not gonna work because let's just put let's determine it. Let's figure it out now, right?
False.
It should return blank if the word is not a string. So what should happen here? In your mind, 111 palindrome, not palindrome.
I mean,
In your mind, right? And this is the idea of development. It's always the dealer's choice, right? So the beautiful thing is if this happens at work, this happens in production, guess whose choice it is?
Matt.
Your boss. Very good. It's usually like the senior developer that's like, you know what? I don't think so. But the beauty is that at some point, you get to make suggestions. And if your boss is sick or working remotely that day, you get to just make a decision. All right? And so what decision would you like to make? True or false? 111. Palindrome, yes or no? Who says yes? Who says no?
False.
Great, false it is. All right, let's actually see what happens. Bloop. Oh no! No method error, right? So undefined method reverse for like this fixed num class. I'm still on Ruby 2.3. Leave me alone. So, what do we do?
It happens so it returns like a string being like if it sees what the argument is, it's gonna be like, is this like type of string or whatever it does, and then be like, this isn't a string, try again.
Yeah. So the idea here is you want to let the user know that they typed in something wrong, right? So you want some sort of like argument error, like, hey, you put in an argument, but that argument was bad. So how can I actually do that? What can I do here?
Can like inherit from the standard error class
You can.
and like put a message, message.
Uh-huh. You could do that. So the idea here is what you really want to do is you want to check what the word is, right? If word.class is what? So if it's a string, then do this. Okay, okay, okay. Else what?
Put in a string.
Huh?
Put in a string.
Put it in a string. So there's a couple things you can do. You can either force it to be a string, right? So I can take the word and 2s it. But do I want to do that, or do I want to let the user know, like, hey, you shouldn't be doing that. You should be putting in a string, not a number. Dealer's choice again, right? So what would you like to do?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the right thing to do here is let the user know, like, hey, you can't do that. Do something else, right? What you'll start to notice is that really good programs have a ton of edge cases and will guess. So in terms of the user experience, what we're going to wind up doing for this example is we're going to tell the user, like, hey, that was bad. But when you're building out applications, think about the user experience, right? If I put 111 and someone's like, oh, you should be putting in string 111, the user's going to be like, what? What does that even mean? All right, fine. You want to put it in quotes? Whatever, man. That's not a good user experience. So you should, in terms of user experience, do some sort of coercion, like forcing it to be a string and then testing it. And that way the user could put in 111 or string 111, and it should still be good to go. So, but for this case, I just kind of want to talk about like all the different examples. The idea here is you want to raise some sort of error. But what error do you want to raise? Right now, the error that we're getting is what? What kind of error are we getting here? Just yeah, I can zoom in a little more. You're getting this no method error. And so what it's telling you is that there's this undefined method reverse. Is that a good error to let the user know about? What kind of error should we let them know? Right, what we should raise is some sort of argument error. But right now, unfortunately, it raises this undefined method error. So let's do this. Let's run RSpec again and see what happens. Oh no. Look, I got raise argument error, expected false, interesting. I'm comparing it this way. So how can I fix this, right? So it should raise argument error if the word is not a string. And so what does this look like to you? Expect followed by this banana and this banana. These bananas over here. Okay, you don't like bananas? Very good to know. Good to know. All right, so I see an expect, and then I see this parentheses, and then I see some sort of argument. So what can you infer expect to be? Expect, it should be some sort of raising an error, right? But this is a method, right? And some methods can take blocks. So we're going to make this a block. Bloop. Okay? I say block because, you ever do this? 1, 2, 3. Oops, those should be commas. And then you do a little bit of this, little each action. And then you can either do this, right? And then you can put in the pipes. Or you can, I think you can just take the block right here. Yeah, like x and then x plus 1. So these curly boys over here just indicate what is known as a block. So this is a block of code. Cool? So I'm just going to pass this in a block. All right? And then this should what? I think it's raise. Raise error, and I think it's going to be argument error. I think that's correct. I could be wrong. Let's just zoom that down a little bit. I believe when you change the method to raise error, it should take the block instead. That's just the way RSpec is written. We can test it and see what happens. Oh, not bad. Okay, great. Expected argument error, but nothing was raised. Interesting. Interessante. Why would that be?
Maybe because it should be parentheses.
Hmm?
Maybe because it should be parentheses instead of a block.
I think it's not raise error. It might just be raise.
Yeah, I think it's just raise.
I think it's raise.
But then mine didn't raise error.
Yeah, that's correct. Sorry. That's
Well,
my
what is
fault. The
raise
syntax
error?
was bad. This should just been raise. Sorry. Any questions on that? That'd have been crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, I still don't understand why there is races sideways.
Which one now? On the RSpec?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a very good question. The question is, why did we decide to raise this argument error and not leave alone the undefined method error? All right? It's like, are you guys following me? Like, why did we choose to do raise argument error and not leave the undefined method error? And I'll tell you exactly why. Because what happens when a user sees this right here? Undefined method reverse for this fixed num. Well, me as a developer, I might do something like this. Oh my God, there's no method there. Guess what? Guess what? There's a method there. Is that what I want my user to do? Is that what I want a developer to do to fix?
I mean,
So the idea here is I want my errors to be specific and to draw the correct conclusion. It's not that the problem is that there isn't a method, it's just that the user input something wrong. And so I need it to be specific so it's clear as to what's wrong, why it's wrong, and how to fix it. Does that make sense?
but
I still don't understand why this space after the braces.
Oh, I put this space to kind of just like show you. You don't need a space here. Yeah, Ruby and JavaScript are great languages. They're like space irrelevant. You just put a bunch of spaces in to make it more readable. Yeah. But everything else is cool?
I mean,
Airborne. All right. So we talked about a little about edge cases, right? So like what if this was a number? But let's actually try to solve what if they actually wanted the string 111. What do you actually want here? We said false? True? What do you want this string 111 to be? True or false? Is this a palindrome, yes or no? Yes?
yes.
No. Oh wow, split.
What?
So I'm going to defer. String 111, palindrome, yes or no?
I mean, what else would it?
Yes? Straight. True story. True that. Should return true if the word or number. Oops, embarrassing. Is a palindrome. Cool. So let's test. Bloop, bloop, bloop. Bam. Good to go. So I got this green. Do I need to refactor? Should I look at, oh, whoa, let's get out of here. Should I refactor? Is this okay? I mean, it looks fine to me, right? There's nothing like crazy we could refactor at the moment. The next thing you want to really consider is there's so many more edge cases, right? Like, what if there were symbols here? Like, sometimes I'm really stupid, and I ask my buddy, like, hey, do you want to go to lunch? Except instead of lunch, I do this. I'm like, yo, bro, you want to go to lunch? I text this to my friend Andrew all the time, right? So does this matter? Should the symbols matter? Like, for whatever reason, if there was a word called lunul, right? Should that matter?
Yes.
I mean, it shouldn't.
Is this a palindrome, yes or no?
It's not.
No.
No, but would this be a palindrome?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm not going to waste your time, but the idea is you want to write a test for this. And I would just simply put in maybe like race car with like a crazy A, and then have the two A's be like the same symbol. And then just be like, hey, it should not care about symbols. All right? And so we can think of edge cases all day, but here's a different type of edge case, and here's sort of like the third rule of thumb. Yeah.
Just one question, when you're trying to build edge cases, should you act like, so like just for the 111 as an example, should you actually leave it as like just the number one? I mean, granted, we know that the 111 kind of like changes it, but should we know that like certain ones are going to be problems and intentionally leave them in there, not trying to correct the test to make it pass?
I don't understand the question.
So I'm saying is like we fixed it with making it like a string. Like if we know there could be certain things again these edge cases that are going to make the test.
You mean like actually numbers? We're going to raise the argument error.
That's what I'm saying. It's just even though we can correct the test, like intentionally just leave the test break.
This doesn't break. This passes the test. This actually raises an argument error if somebody puts in.
Okay.
Yeah. What's up?
Is there a template that you can find kind of like a set amount of edge cases that you can use for every project?
No, which is why you have to follow these rules as you're thinking through the tests in your application. Yeah.
You might have said this before, but are we doing this for our project?
Let me actually just. All right, I'll just start the recording. So here what you see is like we're actually figuring out all these edge cases like, oh my God, this is weird. Then we make a decision. We notice that it doesn't pass. It's red on the test. Then we write some code to make it pass. It's green. And then we assess whether or not we should refactor. So it's almost as if these tests are driving my development. Cool? And so this whole lecture, the idea behind it is this TDD, right? Test-driven development. I have all these cases, I have these scenarios in my mind, and I want to make sure that I write foolproof, good, clean, working code that works in all scenarios and all cases. Not just what is known as the happy path. And that is, if you put in 1, it'll always work. If you put in 9, it's a gamble. Like, I think it should work, but maybe it won't. Oh. And so test-driven development helps with that. Cool. So we talked about like first testing if it works, where it should work, and it doesn't work where it shouldn't work. Edge cases. And this third thing is a little bit weird, and that is known as like space complexity. So in terms of space complexity, I'm not necessarily talking about empty spaces. All right? What I am talking about is how large something is. So for example, right, let's just think this through. Right? In terms of this code here, just this code, is this a palindrome?
Yep,
Is this right here a palindrome?
it should be.
This will pass the method right now. But is that a palindrome?
Yeah, it is.
How can nothing, no words, no letters be considered a palindrome?
Because no letters is equal to no letters, and therefore if you reverse it, you still have the same thing.
While what you're saying is true, the definition of a palindrome is a word, sentence, phrase that when reversed spells out the same word, sentence, or phrase.
Sometimes less said is more.
Again, dealer's choice. When you build your app, you can make it work this way. So, right now this will pass the test, right? Should this be true or false? All right? It should probably be false, right? That doesn't make any sense, at least for me, right? Just bear with me. Follow me on this magical journey, on this magic carpet, right? It should return false if the word, right, is empty. Cool? So, what will happen if I run the test now? It says it got true, but I'm expecting false. So, what do I need to do here? I'm in this red-green refactor, right? Right now my tests are red. I need to make them pass. So, how can I make this pass? What should I be doing here? Check for length. Great. How do I do that? Do I like where do I want to write that? Like inside the string or the argument or where? Okay, so if word.length.
What if they pass in like something really bad? You want to check if it's a string before you check if it is length 0 or not.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, so where would you want to put it?
Inside the if word.class is string.
You guys cool with that? So here? Yeah?
Yeah.
We could do that. We can do that. That's the refactor. Ooh, spicy, right? So basically, like if word.length is what?
Greater than 0.
So greater than 0. Then do this. All right? We can run this test and just take a look. Boop, boop, boop.
You'll get nil. Yeah.
Okay, I got nil. So how do I fix that now?
Else return false.
Oops. Oops, oops, oops. Oops. Bloop. Cool. So now it should be good to go, right? And then we made it work, it passes, and we talked about this refactor, which is if word.class string, then do this. Is this good enough?
No.
Will this work?
Not in every case.
What's happening here?
Raising an argument error if it's empty string.
Right, if it's empty string, is this argument error? Is that what we want? Or do we want it to be false?
Argument error is
Huh? Else if false? Where? Under word.class? Under word.verse? So else if here? Else if false right here?
Yep.
So this one right here?
No. No, your else if up there, you can delete that. Your else if up there, it has delete behind the I 2 times. There you go.
Sorry, I was stuck in JavaScript land. That's how we do it in JavaScript land.
Like condition.
Yeah, yeah.
You need a condition for else if, correct. So what's the condition?
I mean, I think the argument error is fine because the problem is still the thing that the user is putting in.
Yes,
It's not putting in.
yes, the argument error was probably fine, but it should return false.
Okay.
Should return false.
Yeah.
So
word.length is equal to 0.
are we cool with this?
It's one way to do it, yeah. But it needs to have false.
We're cool with this? Let's take a look.
Wait,
It's,
what?
no, it
You
needs to
don't
have
have
a,
Oh, I'm sorry. What is it?
length equals greater than 0.
Man.
Word length. Ta-da.
Great. So here's the thing, right? We can all identify that there's somewhere we could probably do some sort of refactor, right? And we will get to that later. The idea is that you should be refactoring now, but just for the purposes of this lesson, I'm going to continue and then I'll refactor it at the end for you. Cool?
So the stuff like to the left, as you're writing the test stuff, is that just like for the sake of being able to test the tests, or like would you keep this?
Help me out here. Specify the file and the line number, because when you do stuff, when you start using pronouns, it becomes very difficult, and this is just a practice to speak a little bit more technically. So what file, what line number are we talking about? Either program spec or the program.
Line number, but so like when you're writing the program file,
So on the left, this
Yeah.
one, okay.
so like let's say you're like, okay, I'm done with my test, I have everything I need. Like, would you keep that as like some like would you keep that to help with the like program spec stuff, or would you just be like, okay, like now I can use this to know that the program spec works, so I don't need this anymore?
I believe the idea is that at some point my boss was like, hey, guess what? There's a new feature on our website, and what it does is it checks whether or not a word is a palindrome. I need you to build this feature. So this is what I started you out with, because I feel like we can all at least get this far, right? And now, because we've thought through a lot of these tests, hey, I have to make sure it works, and I have to make sure it doesn't return true all the time for no reason, that it actually tests what it should be testing for. And then I threw in the fact that you should be considering like edge cases, right? So the next edge case you could think of is, instead of just this string poop, right? Very good, right? Let's do this. Bloop. At some point, right, I need another edge case. I could think of like, what if somebody threw in a list of just one item, right? What would happen? Should this still work? Remember, I'm checking to see if it's a string, and then it raises an argument error, which makes sense. So I probably want this line of code. All right, so now we're thinking through, oops. Yeah, we're thinking through boop, boop, boop. Right? We're thinking through a lot more of these like edge cases. There's hundreds of edge cases that you could think of that you should be writing a lot of tests for, because users are brilliant and they will always put in the exact same data every single time, the correct data that you need, which we all know is 100% true, right? Yeah, there's no such thing as hackers. It's a myth. Cool? All right. And so then the last thing is like this space complexity. The first kind of thing that we thought of was, what if it's an empty string? What other sort of space complexity can you possibly think of? Right. I mean, you can think of that too, right? So what if, right, a user puts in something like this. What's that really long one that everyone likes so much? Like a man, plan, a canal, Panama.
Yep.
I think that's like the longest palindrome or something like that. So the thing is, like, we've only kind of been dealing with words, but would this work? A man, yeah, a plan, a canal, Panama. Would this work?
No. Well,
Right.
The test itself would pass, but it says false.
This should be true. We all recognize that this is in fact a palindrome, right? But what's happening here? How can we get rid of these spaces? That's like really the idea, right? What can we do? Dot trim where? So obviously, let's just go through that whole exercise. I'm looking, I see this fail, it's red. I need to make it green. And so where would I need to trim this? Okay, so like dot trim and then dot trim here.
If Doctrine does that, I'm kind of agree.
Honestly, I've never seen this trim method. I have no idea what this does. I've never seen trim. I just took your word for it. You were like, you could trim it. I was like, okay.
Is there a way to get rid of white space?
Yes, there's plenty of ways to get rid of white space.
Chomp is trailing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Script does.
So, okay. Function remove all the white spaces. Wow. Let's see. Dot delete. Okay. It emulates PHP's trim function. That's why I believed you, but I was like, I don't think Ruby has it, and I just took your word for it. There's also, I think there's a strip. Huh? So dot delete with the empty string. Let's actually test that. So IRB, I have A space B dot delete with a space. Huh. It works.
Oh, probably a couple of others.
Yeah? Let's run that. Let's run that, Bad Johnson. So dot delete, boop boop, space. I'm gonna copy that like a champion. Boop. Dot trim. Cool. Let's test. Oh, let's get rid of here. Look. Oop. Embarrassing. Bloop. Boom. Good to go. So, I'm calling this dot delete twice. I can see that there's some sort of refactor in there, possibly somewhere, but we'll figure it out. Cool. So ideally, you would refactor now, right? The first thing that I see personally is I'm calling dot delete twice. So I would put like trimmed word equals to word dot delete, and I would pass this in, and then I would just do trimmed word here. Oops. Oh, easy, easy. They're just doing blogs. They're just being cool. Bloop. And we don't need this either. Bloop, bloop. Yeah? And so there's like a slight refactor there. Cool? So who feels good about this like red-green refactor cycle? All right? Who feels like they're comfortable, even though they're probably not going to right now, writing tests? All right? What about understanding the purpose of testing? What's the purpose of testing?
So you look quickly see as your code changes whether each component is working.
Right.
Deliver a better experience to the end user.
That's both very important, right? You want a better experience for the user. You have to make a lot of decisions in terms of your method. You want to make sure that it's foolproof, and you want to make sure that as you're writing methods, it doesn't break anything else. Cool? So now I'm going to basically show you, these are like the main things. I'm going to show you kind of what I wrote, and I'm going to walk you through a lot of the tests. So, yeah. So let's do this. Let's rip all of this. Just put it here. So you can at least see the highlighting. Let's get rid of this. Whoop. Let's go do this. And so let's figure this out, right? I put poop here. If it's not a palindrome, we put duty, right? But it should not care about special characters, right? So this is kind of like the A's that I was talking about. It should not care about spaces. But what about capital letters? Is this still considered a palindrome?
Yeah.
I would consider race car with a capital R a palindrome. But as the code that we have now, would it work? No. So what we would probably have to do is do down case here, or just down case this one thing.
Or case count.
Yeah, we could do that. All right. And so we talked about some space complexity, right? What if they put a bunch of empty spaces? Would this still count? No, this should return false. But our tests already kind of cover that. And so what about this? A single letter. What is B dot reverse? So is one letter a palindrome?
I guess.
Smart. Smart. I like that. That was clever. That was very clever. It's like a mirror though, right? So what do you want to do, right? Again, dealer's choice. This is kind of like what you want to decide. Because some words count, right? A, I. That's about it, right? Right? So you'd have to build in like edge cases for that in your code, right? Like if it's A, then true. If it's I, then it's true, and then run the rest of your code. Cool. So this right here, it's a little messy. Let me show you what I was able to come up with all the way at the end. Ready? Bloop. So this is what you have.
Yeah, that's kind of, yeah.
And this is what I've written. So the idea here is you can raise an argument error if the word is not a string. So this is like fairly readable. And then you want to downcase that word, and you want to remove all the white space. You could do something called gsub, or you can use the delete method. It's up to you. It doesn't really matter ultimately. And you want to return false if obviously it's less than 2 letters, so I'm trying to account for everything in there, right? The A's, the B's, the C's. And then now I want to check to make sure that that downcase word is in fact the reverse of that downcase word. So all of this here, after the whole red-green refactor cycle, is written this way. This is a top to bottom, left to right, a much easier to read piece of code than this at the end of the day when you look at it, because now you can understand what's happening. Cool? And so, yeah, like right in the beginning, you're like, oh, palindrome, I can figure that out in like 4 seconds. I could just use dot reverse. But this is basically what this method would look like in production. And so when you do your test-driven development, it really helps you understand and think through everything that you're building. So right now, you're just trying to make it work and keep doing that. Are there any questions on test-driven development? Or Power Rangers? Okay, great. That's all I have for you.